All right, so you're talking about shameful things that America is doing, Dave. We got to talk about Yemen here. And Biden came in office and promised, well, as a candidate, he was saying we're going to turn Saudi Arabia into the pariah state they are. In early February, almost a year ago now, he says we're ending offensive weapon sales to Saudi Arabia. And honestly, if you're looking at the U.S. Saudi policy, it hasn't changed any from the Trump administration, and so I guess it's kind of gotten ignored. And I don't know what do you think, like overall Biden's policy, and then of course the situation in Yemen.
Oh yeah, Biden's policy with Saudi Arabia. Well, one thing that has happened. I mean, I don't think this is really that important now. Is that the U.S. they are repositioning kind of from the Middle East to the Asia Pacific. Um, Although I think the current troop levels now are kind of what they're going to try to stick with. But as part of that, they took some like Patriot missiles out of Saudi Arabia. But they were, I mean, Trump just sent them there in like 2018 or 2019, I think. But the Saudis, kind of are freaking out about that. And when Biden got into office, he suspended some arms sales to Saudi Arabia. Uh, but since then, he's approved new ones. He approved a missile sale. I think it's 650 million. A helicopter maintenance deal for 500 million. So he's approved over $1 billion in arms sales to Saudi Arabia. And then the Khashoggi thing. I mean, I think they didn't even name MbS in their report on it, or they didn't sanction him or anything. So that was all just for show. And when it comes to Yemen, I mean, at first I was kind of hopeful because he came into office and he reversed the Houthi terror designation, which the Trump administration made. It was like one of their last moves, and it's pretty much so they would have designated the Houthis as a foreign terrorist organization, which pretty much means doing any kind of business with them is criminalized by the U.S. You'll be targeted by U.S. sanctions. So the Houthis control most of North Yemen, which is where Yemen's starving where most of the starving, food deprived population is. And the Houthis are the authorities there. So that was criminalizing delivering them food. So Biden came in and reversed it. And now we have this Houthi attack in the UAE. And at the press conference yesterday, he said redesignating the Houthis as terrorists was under consideration. And, since a year ago when he lifted it, if anything, things are worse now. I mean, people are starting to become more self-sufficient, I guess, and are getting by better under the Houthi-controlled areas than they were. But the bombing campaign has really ramped up, and it really spiked at the end of 2021. Saudis have just been bombing the hell out of Yemen, and they're still blocking oil tankers from docking in Hodeidah. I think the death toll now is 377,000. So, if he does this designation again, it's not going to do anything to the Houthis. That's kind of the important point. If you look at it from like policy wise, it doesn't make any sense because the Houthis, most leaders are under U.S. sanctions. None of them have U.S. assets. It doesn't affect them, but it will affect delivery of the one thing that this Saudi coalition lets into Yemen, which is aid and fuel, and it can hinder that. And all it would do is hurt the civilians. So the fact that that's even a thought is just no good. And the UAE attack, the Houthis launched ballistic missiles and drones at Abu Dhabi, killed 3 people, and the UAE, this is why Biden said it was under consideration, because they want them to redesignate the Houthis as terrorists. But the UAE, I mean, they've been part of this coalition that's just been bombing the hell out of Yemen for so long. And in recent battles around Marib and other areas where the Houthis are fighting, like this Saudi-backed government, the UAE is funding these militant groups that's fighting the Houthis. And I've seen some reporting that says they're funding for a group called the Giants Brigade in Yemen. There has been pretty significant in the Saudi-backed forces' recent success on the battlefield against the Houthis. So to act like this attack came out of nowhere is frustrating to see people say that. But one thing that's interesting is that the UAE, as far as I've seen, they're not blaming Iran. Because
Yeah.
if you remember when the Houthis, they're always sending drones and stuff across the border into Saudi Arabia. But when they did that major attack in September 2019 and like really did some damage to Saudi oil facilities, the whole narrative was Iran. The Houthis could not do this themselves. Iran, 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 Iran. And that's because it fit the narrative of the Trump administration at the time to kind of ratchet up tensions with Iran. And if you look at the spot in Abu Dhabi that they hit, that's further away from Houthi territory than these areas in Saudi Arabia. Now, this was another talking point. That big Saudi attack was that their drones couldn't reach that far. But then you just look back at areas that the Houthis have hit, and they did hit targets further than those Saudi targets. And they've claimed attacks in the UAE before at the Abu Dhabi airport that the UAE usually denied them. They didn't do much, but it did seem like they happened because there's video footage of them and stuff. So they can reach pretty far.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the talking point is they can only do it because Iran, gives them these weapons. But there's not really any evidence to back that up. I mean, there's a blockade on the country, and Lloyd Austin, he recently talked with I forget his name, but a UAE official, and they discussed what they said, enhancing maritime security to prevent weapons from getting in Yemen, which means tightening the blockade even more. Well, at this point, the blockade hasn't done anything to slow the Houthis' weapons advancements. So why is tightening it more going to help? I mean, they have the technology there, and they know how to develop it and produce it themselves. So again, tightening the blockade is just going to hurt the people more. So we're kind of just back at square one in Yemen, and it's not looking good.
I guess I will say maybe one significant thing about moving the Patriot missiles out of Saudi Arabia is since that happened, the Saudis have had to use their own ammunition for their Patriot missile systems. And so now they need more of them, and they're, freaking out because they want, more of those interceptor missiles and things like that. I think they've even tried to get some from the Qataris or something. But, that does create an opportunity in Congress to block that weapons sale. And if the Saudis really do run out of interceptors, that could create a real problem. Now, maybe they would solve that by making a deal with the Israelis or something, but they could also solve that by making a deal with the Houthis. On the terror designation label, this is absolutely unbelievable, isn't it, Dave? That you have the UAE that's backing this Giants Brigade, which is a bunch of Salafists on the ground in Yemen, far more of a terrorist act than launching a drone attack against another country. I mean, maybe the Salafists are fighting against the Houthis, and the Houthis are bombing a oil facility, and unfortunately, the migrant workers of the UAE are the ones that pay the price for the royals' crimes. But I mean, it is a pretty much a more of a military attack than most of the things that the Saudis and the Emiratis do in Yemen. And so to label that a terrorist act is absolutely crazy. And the fact that Biden wouldn't laugh and be like, they're at war. Like, they're constantly bombing the Houthis, and the Houthis fire a shot back, and now you want us to label them terrorists and like cut off all this aid. It's absolutely insane, but that's what they're talking about doing. And I guess, yeah, it's just the Yemen policy has been one of the more unbelievable things to me. It's almost completely flown under the radar. For a few of the Democrats who are good on it under Trump, like Chris Murphy, are now like, oh, well, Biden's good enough, so he said he was cutting the weapon sales and things. And they're no longer standing up on it. And the Republicans, you can't really count on them for anything. And so I see once again, essentially nobody really interested in Congress and Yemen in ending this thing, even though it's the cruelest war. Now, I guess that it's so bad and more people are finding out about it. I guess my real hope is, Dave, is that it's actually people that use the opportunity of the Patriot missile sales, and the next time Saudi Arabia needs this weapons or that weapon. So what do you think about any chances, or what are your thoughts on, I guess the movement and people just, saying enough of this, we're tired of slaughtering these people?
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of good, people, lobbyists and stuff in Washington on this issue. because like you said, it is just so cruel, and it serves no purpose. And the UAE, they have they've been backing out using Al Qaeda to fight the Houthis, so yeah, they can't really call the Houthis terrorists. Um, so yeah, I mean, I'm not too, I don't have much of a positive outlook on this because, the Senate they couldn't block that air-to-air missile sale. As they like to say that they're only air-to-air missiles, so they're not offensive because they can't bomb Yemen with them. But, so a Patriot missile sale, I don't think they would be able to block that. Like if they just put it through right now, I think it would go through. So yeah, I mean, more people just have to become aware of it because, as we saw during the Trump administration, that grassroots movement really they got that war powers resolution introduced and it passed through Congress, but of course Trump vetoed it. So if that could happen again, I mean, this has happened for the past few years. Ro Khanna introduced an amendment to the NDAA that would have ended support for the war with no loopholes in it. And, it got passed in the House to be in the NDAA, but then it was stripped when they negotiated the conference with the Senate. So like a war powers resolution right now, if it was introduced, would it pass? I would hope so, but it's tough to say.
Yeah. And then you probably lose, the few Democrats in the House that were just doing it because they thought it was anti-Trump or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
and now they would, abstain or not vote, and AOC would probably cry about it, but ultimately she would vote for war. So yeah, I guess I'm kind of with you on a little bit of the pessimism there, Dave. I mean, I think that pretty much gets through what I want to cover with you today. I mean, there's so many horrible things the U.S.'s government is doing, and you do such a great job of covering it at antiwar.com. So I don't know, any final overall thoughts? Again, you're one of the closest watchers of Biden's foreign policy. For people who write up articles, you've probably written up the most about them. So yeah, any kind of just final overall thoughts of is this what you expected to see from Biden? Are you surprised by some things?
Well, I will say, I mean, the one, positive thing that we have to, well, this is actually not really that positive anymore because of the sanctions and stuff, but we are out of Afghanistan. That was a nice surprise that we actually got out.
Yeah.
But now the U.S. is still holding on to, I think it's $9 billion in the government funds and keeping sanctions on the country, and it looks like it's gonna get really bad there. And Biden doesn't seem to have any interest in releasing the money and lifting the sanctions. So unfortunately, we can't celebrate that too much now. But I just think when Biden was coming in, the momentum to shift towards the great power competition, as they call it, and really shift to Asia and really shift to China started being built up during the Trump administration. And I saw, as Biden was coming in, no matter what the rhetoric was, like that was the way things were still going to go, and that is what happened. And you can really see it over the past year. So I started at the end of 2019 tracking the amount of U.S. military activity in the South China Sea and stuff like that, because it's just you can put a number on it. You can see that how the U.S. is really focusing on China. And over the past year, I mean, Biden just ramped it up even more, more so than Trump did. The latest thing I wrote up on it was the aircraft carrier strike groups. They sent 10 aircraft carrier strike groups entered the South China Sea in 2021, compared with 6 the year before, which, that's a significant thing. And then you have the AUKUS deal with the UK and Australia. So as much as there's all these Russia hawks in the Biden administration, Newland and Blinken and all these horrible people that would not mind, sucking Russia into a war in Ukraine, I still think the ultimate long-term thing here is China. So I think that's just something people need to keep in mind. And I mean, Taiwan, I mean, there's this, I think her name is Elaine Luria. She's House representative from Virginia. She represents like Virginia Beach area, Norfolk, I think. I don't know if it's the same district there, but there's a lot of shipyards and stuff there, and she wants to give Biden authorization to go to war with China over Taiwan. Like now, she wants to give that to him. So if China invades, he can respond right away. And I mean, that's what we're kind of dealing with. I mean, how insane of a thought is that we would go to war with China if it's as crazy as going to war with Russia over Ukraine.
Right.
So, and this is a Democrat, because you've always had your Tom Cottons kind of crazy Russia hawk, crazy China hawks that have said that, but now we're going to start seeing this from the Democrats. And so that's what kind of really unnerves me. And again, I feel like I say this every time I'm on here and I talk about China, but in order to really have a hot war with China, we need an economic decoupling. And that would be a slow, long process if they actually go for it. But you're starting to see some things. Biden signed a bill that would ban imports from Xinjiang unless they can prove that there's no forced labor in the supply chain. But so that'll be like a matter of, okay, how willing are they to give waivers for that? Because they can just say that they're lying,
Right. I
So
guess the good thing is, right, that like the people who would get waivers would be like Coca-Cola and Nike and things like that. Companies that have the resources to hire lawyers and former,
yeah,
Bill Clinton and Barack Obama administration officials that now have lobbying firms to go send those lawyers into Congress and talk with the right people at the Treasury Department or wherever the hell that you need to like. So I guess my hope is that like, the corruption of the United States and on the market Wall Street side will be more powerful than the corruption of the United States on the military industrial complex side. However,
that's what
I
we
might
hope
just
for.
be
Yeah.
wishing a little bit there.
Well, I think that's a pretty major. That legislation is kind of a tell. It's pretty major because you think of all the big corporations you could think of do some kind of business in
And
Xinjiang,
some of
source
them
some stuff from
lobbied
there.
against it, like directly lobbied
Yeah,
against this. I think Coca-Cola was one. And so,
yeah,
yeah, I mean,
and Nike too, I think.
yeah.
Or no, actually Nike. There was like a report that said Nike did, but then they denied that they lobbied against it, but they probably did. But
Um,
so and you think about this passed through the House and Senate unanimously. I think Thomas Massey voted against it in the House.
mhm.
That was it. I mean, that's saying something because all these people in Congress, they have interest in these corporations making money in China. So there's a shift happening,
Yeah.
and it might not be about the corporations making money right now. I think it's more kind of about power, and then the military industrial complex is probably going to win the power struggle. But this stuff with China, it's just it's scary, and it's scary how kind of propagandized everybody is about China. Everybody hates China now.
Yeah. No, and that's the last thing I wanted to ask you. And this is the reason that the China issue I think is actually a little bit more concerning than Russia. Because on Russia at least, you got Tucker Carlson, you got like, the Russiagate skeptic crowd, so like some of the left is there, but also like, just some of the right-wing people who happen to be good on Russiagate are skeptical of like the whole Ukraine invasion issue and things like that. On the China issue, you have nobody. Tucker Carlson, Tim Pool. Reason Magazine is running like reviews on books from the New Lines Institute, saying that there's a genocide going on against the Uyghurs. I mean, there's almost no resistance. There's nobody that is any good on it. Hell, even like the people who don't want intervention against China are, especially if they're anywhere remotely like on the libertarian or right side, have to spend the first like 10 minutes of anything they say. Well, the CCP is really bad at, Taiwan and Hong Kong and the South China Sea and these islands and reefs and in the Senkaku Islands and the Uyghurs and the Tibetans. And they have all these things that they'll go and qualify everything they say before, we probably shouldn't go to war with them though. And so there's almost nobody on the China issue that's willing to make any kind of reasonable defense unless maybe they're Maoist, which is almost worse,
Yeah.
right? And so where do you like, who do you think is like doing some like analysis and work on the China issue?
Oh man, I mean, besides us and people we're close with, man, I'm like just blanking out right now because it's really tough uh, to think of anybody. Um, yeah, I mean, I know like Robbie Martin has done some stuff. He's pretty against this escalation with China, and there's other people, but like people besides Robbie, like anybody with like a big audience, like some of the big names, I can't really think of anybody. I mean, Dave Smith is good on this stuff. I don't know how much he focuses on it though, because it does need more attention than it's getting from a lot of people. You know, of course Scott Horton, but he is included in people close to us. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, you got to think about it. Like, could you imagine somebody going on Tucker? I think McGregor said something when he was on there. Like Tucker was like, "Oh, Colonel, what do you think about all the Chinese building ports in the Caribbean?" And McGregor just kind of turned it around. He's like, "Well, I think if you look at the South China Sea, the U.S. is antagonizing China," and Tucker just made his dumb face. So that was good. And he's a good guy. He's pretty good on everything, McGregor.
Mm-hmm.
So he's good. Get the American conservative.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some bad China stuff in there too, but they also have Peter Van Buren, who's been really good,
Yeah.
and Basevich. I think he's been writing about China recently. Maybe not.
I do know like the Quincy Institute, of course, usually has like some good stuff, but I was more like thinking like a little bit more in the mainstream. You know what I mean? Like Tim Pool
Yeah,
has a big audience and things and something like that where I talk about the Quincy Institute to people, and most people don't know what I'm talking about. If I bring up Tim Pool,
yeah,
like most people are like, at least at least they, even if they like instinctually kind of don't like him because their narrative against him is just like he's a bad guy. They kind of know who he is. You talk about the
yeah,
Quincy Institute, they don't even know they're supposed to hate it.
yeah,
So yeah, but but McGregor is a good example of somebody who will get on Tucker Carlson and isn't somebody who is at all favorable towards the CCP, and at the same time won't advocate for intervention or play along with any of those stupid games. So yeah.
yeah, yeah, and of course Ron Paul and Dan McAdams.
Yeah,
Uh, and they have a pretty good size audience.
that's very
So
true. Yeah.
yeah, I mean Tim Pool. You think of it, there is like the mainstream media, and then there's also like the independent media. But a lot of these independent media people, they get more views than CNN, like Tim Pool, and he's pretty bad on China, and he's bad on Russia too. I saw him do some segment, and he was saying like Putin wanted to restore the Soviet Union, and the only two people I heard say that during this whole thing was Victoria Nuland and Tim Pool. Like he doesn't know what the hell he's talking about on this.
Right.
Like it's funny because I've seen him do this with China. He just loaded up like some mainstream news articles and just read them, and that was his coverage. So he doesn't foreign policy. He's really bad. And a lot of people watch that. So Scott went on there and pushed back against some of the China stuff, and you looked at the chat, and everybody's calling him a commie, and
Yeah.
it's a pretty sorry state. So I think we got to work on it and kind of get the message out more.